Friends, a rather warm welcome on a rather cold evening to all of you for having made it in spite of all the impediments one could imagine. As you know, Raza Foundation, in collaboration with the India International Center, has been organizing this series called Art Matters. In fact, I was jokingly telling KRISHEN early this evening that we should now call it Art Doesn't Matter. But that is another way of looking at what matters and what doesn't matter. From the last time we started a structural change, as it were. Although we retained the title, we now concentrate on a single artist. And we are hoping that this will continue for a while. We hope that next January we will have Ashish Nandi in conversation. In February we'll have Charles Correa in conversation. In March, perhaps Neelima Sheikh in conversation, and so on. KRISHEN KHANNA, as you know, and I'm reminded of what Eliot, I think, alluding to King Lear, said, "The eldest have seen the most. We who are so young shall neither see so much nor live so long." He is one of those who have been on the scene of Indian art for more than half a century and is one of the most outstanding artists of the post-independent democratic India. He has been, apart from being a major painter, he has been involved with institutions, at least two major institutions, the Lalit Kala Academy and the Bharat Bhavan. And he has been many things that you would learn during our conversation. It's difficult. Many artists are reluctant to talk. Many artists believe that their job is to paint, and that's it. And it is left to others to interpret, and more often than not misinterpret what the artists mean to do or mean to say, etc. But KRISHEN KHANNA is an exception. He is one of the most articulate, eloquent of our artists. So we are going to see a lot of it this evening, I hope. And in spite of the fact that he was not keeping exactly very good health, and although he's going to turn 90 next year, and we hope to celebrate that occasion joyously and gratefully. And we had requested MANISH PUSHKALE, a young artist who is quite aware. And I also chipped in, because if there are two, the choreography looks better. Otherwise, two, either single, or as the dancers would say, tihai hona chahiye, sort of the three of us. So I'll butt in whenever I feel like. So there you are, KRISHEN KHANNA in conversation. And then, at the end of when we have been done with, it will be open to you to ask brief, sharp, clearly articulated questions, or maybe some comments, although I'm a little wary of comments because they tend to be boring and long. But anyway, you are free to do what you like. But that is after the conversation with the two of us is over. And I'm again reminded of Ghalib, अगले वक्तों के हैं ये लोग, इन्हें कुछ न कहो, ये जो हर बात पे अंदोह रुबा कहते हैं. तो खुदा जाने ये अंदोह रुबा कहते हैं कि नहीं, अगले वक्तों के हैं ये लोग, इन्हें कुछ नहीं कह रहे हैं, पर इनसे कुछ कहलाएं तो. So there you are, KRISHEN KHANNA in conversation with us.
There you are. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Shan.
I ask you to, you don't want to forget this.
Yours is blue, mine is pink.
Yeah, okay.
but about yourself, about art, about the world.
Mic काम नहीं कर
Might come नहीं कर कैसे काम हाँ. Whatever you want to say about yourself, about your art, about the world, about what we are and what we are not.
I really don't know how to start this.
No, there you are.
Okay.
This is working. Take this.
Okay, is this any better? All right. Now, it's true. I've been a painter for a long time. I can't even remember when I first started. My father was very keen on art, and he was a lecturer in history in Government College Lahore. But he did paint a lot himself, and used to take all the classes that were free. He would go to the Mayo School of Art and do his watercolors and life drawings and whatever. And this somehow rubbed off on us, seeing him do these things. And I think it still remains, one of the great miracles, as it were, when people see somebody drawing somebody and somebody appearing on a bit of paper or something. They think it's something quite magical as to what is happening. And most of the time it is not, of course, but sometimes it does happen. There is magic. However, I was not to be discouraged at all. In fact, it was the other way around. There was a lot of encouragement, and every Saturday and Sunday was devoted, in fact, to spending time drawing and painting and whatever. My first memory actually goes back to my endeavor to copy The Last Supper of Da Vinci, which everybody smiled at, and they said, no, I couldn't do it, you see, and I took it to my father, and he did it almost like a big postage stamp of The Last Supper. Didn't, the faces, but the disposition of people, where they were, the compositional aspect was evident. Somehow that's remained with me, that the important thing in any painting, for instance, which I happen, whatever the emotions which are sort of applied and which work themselves into a work, ultimately it's the actual handling of that particular space that we are given, and it's the appropriation of that space vis-a-vis the, whether it's abstract or whether it's figurative, makes no difference. The space remains space and has to be accommodated, has to be functional. And so that actually remains a problem which never seems to end. I mean, it goes on. You can go on repeating the same thing, but that gets very boring. So one alters the thing until, I'll cut this short. We've been so used to having a four-sided canvas in which space has been defined in those terms. And so we look upon art as the 3x4 or 4x6 or whatever. So you are in fact working within the area which is given, whatever size, but the ends are visible. Quite contrary to what was happening, for instance, in this country long ago, was there was no border. I mean, you were dealing with huge areas, so there's no beginning, no end, but there's a passage through it, which requires actually a very different orientation towards art and towards composition as such, because you're not composing in a geometrical fashion. So I'm having a shot at that, rather late in the day maybe, but I've done some pretty large works which have opened up different vistas for me, which actually take into account what has been done. You know what appropriation means, you know what sides do, and yet you go beyond the limits of that, because you're dealing with a whole different dimension. And each time that one is confronted with, I think this is what should be happening now with all the buildings that are going up, and you see all these rabbit hutches, on there, all the accommodations the same, more or less, and so you can see that the walls are going to take only paintings of a particular size in a particular. And I think that needs to be broken somehow. I think, and it is being done. I mean, I think artists, whether they're proceeding on this kind of basis on which I'm mentioning or not, but they are reaching out to a very different kind of dimension, which is possible, which can be investigated, and is there, for them to try out. Well, I mean, I am a painter basically, so I can only really reach out through the medium that I know best. I've had a shot at other things too. They're amusing, but really one is pegged down to extending what you know, and that's where the difficulty is also. And I think art without that kind of basic difficulty is just fun. It doesn't go beyond that. Not that fun is bad. I'm all for fun, but I think there's another kind of satisfaction which accrues when you are really faced with a problem, which is about to defeat you, and then something happens, and then you can go through with it and find something which is, I wouldn't say path-breaking. It sounds awfully trite, frankly, but it's a way out. Yeah, it's a little, and it can be explored, and it does explore. And I've done these. I've done 3 or 4 very large works like this.
One of them is 80 feet.
It's 90 actually. It's a drawing. It's a drawing which is 90 feet long. Well, I don't want to go into stories,
Why not? Go ahead. Yes, please.
No. All painters have to live, artists have to live. So one day I was in Madras seeing.
In Chennai, you mean?
In Madras those days. My daughter's a dancer, and she was having her Rarangetram or something there, and I went really for that. And in the intermission, there was a friend of mine, Shona Ray, who was probably known to a lot of you. Shona was doing a hotel at that stage. And she said, come, I'll show you what I'm doing, and I want your advice about something. We went, and she'd done the restaurant and so on. That was the lobby, which is huge. And it's this pure marble. It was just staggering. There was the counter was at the end, and the 2 black runners of black were going there and then suddenly going across to this thing. And she said, and above that there was this space, 90. It was, it was huge. It was large. And she said, well, we want something there, I said, what you need there is actually a drawing, because but I know this hotel won't do that, because drawings are sort of for poor people. I mean, rich hotels don't want drawings in them. What they might want is, big, large chunks of paint, which will probably crash down on people's heads or whatever. But anyway, I left it. And so she said, "You really think a drawing is good?" I think, yeah, I think really a drawing is good. Do you think you could do it? I said, no, I can have a shot at it. I don't know. One never knows these things, you see. And I came back to Delhi, and then a few days later, there was this director from ITC who called me up and said, "Can I come and see you?" I said, "Yes, of course." So he said, "You said that you could do this. Do you think you can do it?" I said, "I don't know. I mean, I think I can." And I'd said this really, I was quite brazen about it, because I'd been doing photography just then and thought, and you always think of easy ways out, you see. And I thought, well, now I won't tell them what I'm going to do, but I think what I'll do is I'll do these drawings, the Chola migrations. I do these drawings, little tabletop things, photograph them, and then blow them up. to size, and that be that. See. So I said, well, I can try, yeah, and we laminate the whole thing. So I started on the first drawing, and then it had to be laminated, and you have to do a exact way in which the whole thing was going up. Then this is miniaturization of the process. And so I cut up this drawing into like 4 or 5 slices, and then sent them for processing. You see, and the awful thing happened then, because in between the central 2 or 3 panels, they did not match up with each other in the exposure. So you suddenly had a dark area, of a ship moving like this, and suddenly it becomes light. And I said, no, this won't do. My father came to me. He said, and he said, what the ITC director asked me. He said, what's it going to cost? I said, I don't know, 25,000. It's a lot of money for us those days. He said, okay, done, and I suddenly saw this thing. It wasn't going to happen at all. And so my father came and he said, so what's your way out? I said, there's no way out. I just have to draw it out in the size. Have you ever done this? I said, no, but we're going to have a shot at it, And that's what happened. I mean, I went down, we found this, I've been very fortunate in having very good friends all over the place. And Michi Seth was then was the head of Formica. So Michi was anxious that something in that Formica be taken out of bathrooms as it was, you see, and be added to the upper echelons of art and so forth. So I went to Michi. I said, no, I have this project. Do you think we can do it? He said, we have a shot. Everything was like a shot, you see. And that's wonderful. And that's actually all art is, just that.
Having a shot.
Having a shot. I mean, it can fail also, because you've got to play for that. Huh? Yeah. So here I was, and he built a little studio for me. This was in Pune. Pune. And he said, built a studio, and I locked myself in for the first half of this. I drew it. They put up these 4 huge panels. These guys would come with gloves on, holding these sheets and so on, and putting these things 3 up. And I would then number them, 1, 2, 3 connectors and all the rest of it. And I started drawing from the scratch. And I was amazed at myself that I could do it, frankly. I'd never done anything as large as that. And then it went on. And I managed to do the whole thing. Then, of course, when this happened, I had to revise my estimates, you see. And that was, he said, well, okay, we see your difficulty. Well, how much is it going to be? I said, double it. So that was big money for me, you see. So anyway, so it was, I think, around 50,000 or something that the whole thing was done. But I had the biggest thrill doing this thing. It was a huge drawing. And the beauty of it was, now here's the whole business of space coming in, because here you've got to the space actually is absorbed inside of you. You imagine where things were and how it's continuing and all the rest of it, and then when you do 4 panels, they're taken away and they're put down, and other than the last panel which is put up there for continuity. But how the continuity is going to function is the problem. So I said to this thing, and I'd been to Borobudur, fortunately. I'd seen this whole thing in Borobudur. There were these sculptures which are bas-reliefs, really. I photographed them, so I looked at all of that, and I did the ships, you see. But the Borobudur ships are about that big, but this was huge. Anyway, I did this and added my own drawings and the sea and people drowning and the terrible lives at sea and all the rest of it. It seemed to work out. And in fact, when the first half was done, and it was put in the process, you see, the Formica, they put a sheet on it which they call the skin. and then on that is a blanket, and then pressure is put on this at a certain degree, and finally the thing comes out looking just like what it was before. And it was just lying there, you see. So when Michi came back, he says, "Aren't they getting on with it?" I said, "It's done." He says, "It's done." Even he didn't know. So there it was, and then this finally went up, and putting up this thing in that it was a right angle situation. That was quite difficult, because how do you get these things up in order, connecting at right angles? So we had to devise a system of trolleys and wheels on which the whole thing could be slid, on that. That was quite a sort of a procedure. But it was done, and it looked very well. And then I went back. I was very happy with it. And then 3 months later, I got a call saying, it's getting dusty, it's getting dirty. How do we clean it? So I said, well, just hose it down. And that's exactly what they did. They pushed water over it, soap and everything, and it stayed. And they were amazed, and I was more amazed. I mean, finally I had a show in London, and this is the first time I ever saw this exhibited in one big, in a 90-foot span. This was in Burlington House. This was shown there, and this huge thing just went and was shown there, and not the original. The original was with ITC. They actually did a copy. The whole thing was a facsimile copy, large, and it was put there like that. And it made quite a, I don't know what others thought of it, but I thought it looked very good. And so that was one way of breaking the edge, as it was, you see. I mean, it's not what they call cutting edge, but it's just the edge. See, the next thing was then they thought that I could have done that. How about doing the Chola cupola? As you enter, there's this vast area. It's about, I don't know, it's huge. And it had these rafters there, and then Ajit Haksar, who was then the big man there, he said, "Can you do this?" So I said, "I can have a shot." So he says, "Okay." Then I asked my various friends, people who had been taught how to do murals and so on. I'd never been taught, you see. So I asked various chaps. I asked Akbar. He said, "Put a figure in each one." I said, "Well, that'd be rather boring. What happens to it? It's a 3-tiered affair. It goes up. So it has to have some logic within itself, you see." And finally, Ramachandran, who had studied in Shanti Niketan and had done mural painting, he came up with because these rafters were coming in between, you see, like dividing. He said, "We'll do something like behind, the whole scene is behind the rafters. Don't cut, and the hotel was ready to cut the rafters down." And I said, "No, don't do that, because that would be finding an answer by mutilation, and that's not right." So we have to find so we did exactly that. Now that too was, the whole thing was not planned. We did lots of planning on it, but I mean, the planning was a sort of a game in itself, you see. It wasn't to be translated in that. I mean, Ramu did suggest that he had his students in Jamia Millia, and they could project the slides, get the whole thing there, and then do it, and I tell them what colors to put. And I said, "No, that I don't agree to. I've agreed to do it myself, and I'm going to do it myself," and I did it. But then once this happened, this hotel, naturally, they're interested in their industry, not in my art so much at that stage. They said, "Well, how long is this going to take?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I've never done anything as large as this." So they said, "Well, a month?" I said, "No, a little more than that, possibly." Okay. I said, "Well, I'll try it. Let's see." It went on for 5 years, this thing, And they took it. I mean, that was the stride at which it worked. And there were other artists working with me also at this stage. And that's how it got completed. And I mean, when I look at it now, and if I was asked if I'd do something as large as this now, I think I'd give a flat no. But it was great fun doing it. I didn't do anything else, but I was just then embroiled with the mural as such. Now, having said that, I could go on till the cows come home, but I think I'll leave it to my friend here.
KRISHEN ji, recently.
Oh, you better take this in.
No,
Okay.
my exhibition is going on in Hyderabad. So I requested your brother, Mr. KHANNA, to inaugurate it.
Oh.
He came, he inaugurated. I know your son Karan. Why I'm taking these names?
Yeah.
Because there is something common.
Yeah.
That is the sense of humor.
Yeah.
And I think that is something which exists in the family. I mean, the three
Well, yeah.
different people, you know.
Yeah.
So I want to start with this, that you are one of the artists who is known for great sense of humor. I'm coming from Bhopal, and many friends there, they are always sharing, sharing those stories, different stories about your sense of humor, and stories between you and Swami, and
Yes.
when you were displaying those works.
Yeah.
So that is always a reason of the curiosity for me, but I didn't got an opportunity to be in detail, to hear those details from you. But let me remember another friend of yours, Mr. Bal Chabra, your
Yes.
great friend, and
He's
a man of
not
great
only,
sense
not
of humor.
only my great friend, he was a great
Yes,
friend of all the
or
people.
everyone.
Yeah, he was.
I want to start how you remember him today. I mean,
How do I remember him? He almost appears, sorry, and he, apropos of nothing, suddenly he appears into my mind's eye and I start laughing and smiling, because this is what he did to me. He was sort of self-igniting, he sort of entered a conversation, and I've never known anybody who was so spontaneous in his reactions to things, his emotional reactions, his intellectual reactions. He compressed, for instance, the whole of the English language into 4 words, which expressed everything, Fatang. Yeah.
Jesus.
That everybody was a good or bad geezer, you see. I mean, I remember one instance when there's a long story, but eventually what had to happen, they hadn't heard of Jesus Christ, you see. So I said, I'll introduce you to somebody very nice. And so I went, there was Gaitonde and him, and I bought 3 copies of the Bible. Very few people have gone in and ordered 3 copies of the Bible, but I bought 3 copies of the Bible. One I kept for myself. The other 2 I gave one to Gaitonde and one to Bal. So when I went to see Bal one day, he was reading the Bible. Then he looked up, I said, what's up? And he had tears coming down his cheeks, I said, what's the matter? He said, this guy was quite a geezer. That's the kind of chap he was. As secretive, he couldn't believe, he was a wonderful painter and a natural painter. Yeah. He couldn't believe it, you see, that he thought we were the important painters. And we all centered in his house. Without him, I don't think the group could have existed. And so Hussain had actually urged him. He said, you meet these chaps every day and you talk so much. Why don't you start painting? And he did. He outran everybody. Then he was then persuaded to send a painting to Japan. There was Manish had a biennale, and the biennale paintings were sent, his was sent, mine, Hussain, all these guys. The whole consignment, and Bal had one, which was sent as well. Then news came through, Rekha Menon, who was managing the international thing, something, and she said, you know what's happened? I said, what? Bal has got the governor's award there. So I said, that's wonderful. So I called him up. He thought I was pulling his leg. He said, no, this can't happen. You know, this is not a good joke either. And He gave me a bill. I said, it's absolute true. It's going to come about. And fine. He said, well, in that case, I suggest you just don't talk about it to anybody. He was scared, you see, that this might be a fraudulent, then he would look silly and, all the rest of it. But he did get the award. He didn't want anybody to know that he got, But such were my contemporaries and my friends, They were somehow very secretive people, full of laughter, all of them. Every one of them. And Gaitonde was no less. I mean, David says he was a Zen priest, quiet and so on. Nothing of the sort. I mean, he may have appeared like this to a lot of people, but between us, he was, full of fun, a very live character, actually. That's actually one of the great things I think of that group was the very fast interchange of language, even, which went on in that group. I remember one occasion I was being interviewed in Pandol Gallery, and I was having a show there, and Hussain was sitting next to me, and this fellow was interviewing me, long interview. And this chap says to me, and he said, look, just one last question. I said, yeah. He said, where were you born? So before I could say, Faisalabad or what, Hussain piped up. He says, Bombay. So I looked at Hussain and I said, no. He said, the only part that matters. So this kind of ready wit, spontaneity, not being ponderous and all that, I think it was a hallmark of this particular community at that time. And I think a lot of their works bear that out, the spontaneity with which it was done, At the same time, I mean, it was just not a free for all, as it were, but I mean, it was a highly considered thing at the same time. These are two identical, different things. I mean, opposites which exist, but they did exist. You see, on the one hand, they could joke and jive and be light-hearted about how things are, but in actuality, there's a great deal of seriousness, and there were very, very serious conversations. I mean, didn't quite come to fisticuffs, but damn nearly, I mean, they were very, very bitten.
No, I have always wondered that this group was, I mean, everyone was so different from everybody else.
Yes.
And yet this was a group. They were together.
Yes.
Now what bonded them together?
Well, I think it's a very good question.
There was not a shared vision. Each one has a different vision. There was no shared style, because each one has a different style and medium.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think for one thing, there were so few, and in a situation which was full of Philistines, so you had to hang together. There was that compulsion, but it was never said as much. We were just very good friends, and I think there was the capacity in each one of us to be able to see, not self-project. It wasn't projection of yourself in everybody else, You were really looking at that person and what his genre is and what he is doing and what his style is and what his future is, and you entered into the soul of that guy and his work. So any comments which were made then about that work were to a great extent very objective in a sense. They were not colored by your own particular sense, So I think this was one of the great things that happened. That they were capable of seeing each other's work without projecting themselves into it. And nobody wanted to think that, he was cock of the walk. Nobody thought that. Apart from that, there was, and the interesting thing is that long after the group perished, or it didn't perish, it disintegrated, people going to different places and so on. We kept together by correspondence, as you know.
Yes, we have published 2 volumes.
Yeah.
It's quite amazing.
Yeah, it is, and all the things were discussed in it, and this went on. I mean, it was cross hatching all the time. Like Raza and I used to write to each other very regularly. Me and Akbar were writing to each other regularly. Ramkumar, I had Ramkumar, and then the same with Tayyib Mehta. Even Sheikh later on, then Bhupin Khakkar, and people who were outside the group. I mean, it wasn't a closed, symmetrical kind of thing locked in. I mean, it was artists who were talking to each other, you see. And that was wonderful. It went on long after things happened in Bombay, for instance. It continued. I mean, there was that desire to be in touch with people and with ideas. And a lot of ideas were discussed then.
In fact, I was coming to this dialogue actually. Recently when Raza Foundation has published this book, The My Dear, which is an outstanding example of a continuous dialogue of 50 years between two painters. You know, for me, a painter from the younger generation, it's really an example of a great learning. And I have gone through all those letters. I have worked on that book very closely, so I'm aware of it. But KRISHEN today, in today's time when we are living in a kind of information technology, and when the mode of communications are different, they are more faster and more spontaneous. And whereas on the other hand, in letter writing, you're writing a letter and Raza is keenly waiting. Hear something from you, or you're waiting for the reply of it. And sometimes, it is very spontaneous, sometimes it is delayed because of reasons. Now, in the time of this spontaneous dialogue between the two, that the exchange of the words is there, but the dialogue is missing. How you take it in today's time?
Well,
this art of letter writing somewhere, that fun of letter writing, you can't compare it.
No, I think
SMS or emails.
The other thing is that I still like to write letters. I don't like to tap it out on the computer, you know. Although it's much faster, the communication so much faster. You write now, you get an answer back immediately and so on. But this was not a kind of thing where you want an answer back immediately anyway, I mean, this is the pouring in food for thought, take it for what it's worth, and all that kind of stuff used to go on. And several issues. The other thing was that we were trying to get on, we didn't only want to stay in a little island called Bombay. I mean, we had to spread ourselves, as it were, and there was a lot of effort in that, and a lot of helpful effort with each one of us. I can't see this thing happening at all now, because the economics of it, I think, preclude this kind of assistance, this kind of mutuality. I mean, I recall, for instance, I was on my way to London having a show. I was a broke journey. I was staying with Raza in Paris, and he said he just shone in London, and he gave me a list of people who had visited his show, people who had bought, ticked off, that do invite these people. They're very important, and so on. And I did, and they came and they bought. So I mean, this help was given without any reservation whatsoever. Tayyib's case was different. I mean, we all try to help Tayyib. Tayyib's personality was almost against him. He was not against him, but he was a tough character to chew. He wasn't. I mean, he was very lovely, wonderful human being, but he didn't somehow rub off that easily on people. And we all tried to get him assistance. And I mean, I remember, for instance, he got the Rockefeller, and he was coming back. And when he was away, I was looking after his kids, by the way. And when he's coming back, he said, I said, "Want to come and live in Delhi for a while?" So he said, okay, he would come. And we got him, one story leads to another. There was a wonderful man in Nizamuddin who used to find rooms for artists, because that whole area was absolutely bristling with writers, painters, and it was really a wonderful area. And you could walk in, and everybody, you never had to be introduced to anybody. You just knew, hello, hi, okay, fine. And that's all gone now. It's gone.
Yeah.
But when Tayyab was coming back, he had to be steps. So we went to this guy who was finding these places. We called him the angel, you see. so I said, "What happened? Have you got a room for that?" He says, "I've got a palace for him." I said, "Really?" He said, "It's a marvelous place, wonderful." I said, "Oh, really? I'm sure. How expensive is it, this palace of yours?" He says, "Not so bad, not so bad." I said, "Okay, let's go and see." Well, this palace was a little room above the garage. You had to go around the place, there was steps going up, and you went in there, and there was one room divided into two. So he said, "How do you like it?" I said, "Marvelous, marvelous." So then Tayyab came. Tayyab was installed with Sakina, the two kids and everybody. And they were happy. And then he said, "But now," to this chap, he says, "I'm a painter, I've got to paint. Where am I going to paint in this place? They're going to live." He said, "Don't worry." He says, the people who are renting out this thing, who've got the car underneath, and you're on top, he said, they're gems, marvelous people. They'll accommodate anything. You'll be like a member of their family. God heavens. So he goes there, and they were very nice people. You had to go right the way through all their private rooms and everywhere, and there was a little room somewhere else. He said, "You can paint here." So this is how he did a lot of his work, you see. Having established him there in this palace, the next thing was the wherewithal. How do you pay for it all? How's that going to be managed? So I went to Kumar. Kumar was the great standby in those days, and he was the first gallery that ever sort of supported artists on a regular kind of basis, you see. I went to Kumar, I said, "Tayyab is coming, he's a wonderful painter. I think, why don't you give him come to a basis, get onto a basis with the chap?" He said, "Yeah, sure, if you say so." So I said, "He's very good." And so he said, "Fine. Can I see his work?" I said, "Sure." And he came and saw some of his work, and then didn't say anything. That's it. Then he came. So I said, "Have you seen him?" Yes, he's a good painter, good painter. I said, "Yeah." So what do we do? He says, "I'll give him 250 rupees a month." I said, "The guy's got 2 children. He's got a wife. He's staying there. He's got to buy paint. And you think 250 is going to pay for all of that?" He said, "Well, what do you suggest?" So I said, "Give him what you're giving me," which was 500. He says, "Do you think he's as good as you are?" I said, "He's much better. Give him 500, he'll kick off, he'll start off on that." So he got 500 a month.
Which year is this?
All time becomes one. No, but I'll tell you, it was roughly this was in the 80s.
No. 80s is not possible.
67, 65.
Huh?
Yes, yes.
Okay. My daughter says she knows. Okay. Yeah.
He was 9-year-old.
It is early 60s, I believe.
Yeah, mid-60s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that was it, and we tried. So on top of the group, we tried different ways in which his work should be involved, and all that. He was in every major event that took place. We went to the front one night. We were having an auction for in the Pakistani war, second war. There was an auction going on. Ramesh Thapar was then he was doing it, and I was his lackey, you know, carrying paintings and saying a few words which would entice people to buy them and all this kind of thing. So then this was being televised. And there was a colonel who was the spokesman of the army, and I knew him, Pyara Lal. And Pyara Lal, when I went home, he was sick. So he couldn't go, he couldn't attend, but he called me up. He said, that was a very good auction and it was very good, and I have an idea. I said, well, what's your idea? He says, well, you know, why don't you and your friends go to the front and paint, you know, heroic scenes and so on for the good of the Indian army and great stuff and so on. I said, that sounds very good. So I walked, and Nizamuddin was a walkable place. I went to see Hussain, Tayyib, Ramkumar,
Guy?
no, Guy Tonde wasn't there then, and me. So there were the four of us. We went, they all said yes, yes. And the next day we all went. Hussain was the last to appear. He came on his own, much like himself. That we kept waiting in the car, and they came in the train looking for Hussain. He never turned up. But he turned up on the field of battle, you see. And to which Ramkumar sort of nudged this officer who was showing. He says, that's our general. And indeed, he had a hat on, you know, leather trousers, or he looked a dish, I can tell you that, you know. But we went there, we went to all these scenes and so on. That's a story unto itself.
And we were the Sousa that time.
Huh?
So we were the Sousa.
Sousa was in England. He was a British national living in England. Actually, I think he was probably the most honest of them all, because that is the tradition to which he really anchored himself.
Yeah.
And he was a fine painter, but he really became a part of of a British tradition. And that's it.
You condemned him very harshly
Tayyib,
in some of the letters to Raza, you know. Now it's a
no, but I told him to his face also, you know.
Yes.
And it's a very funny story, because I'd reviewed Sousa's first show in Bombay, and in Marg magazine, and then this was years ago, past many years later, I see Sousa in Holland Park, London. We go to a pub and having a beer, you know, and we're chatting away. And he said, you know, there was an article that appeared in Marg magazine, like many years ago. I said, yeah, and about my painting, my exhibition, and it was signed KK. And between Raza and him and Akbar, they wondered, they thought it's possibly Karl Khandalawala who written this rather acidic article in which I said that I said. So he said, was it Karl or was it you? I said, it was me. And I said, and I had accused him of projecting his own personality over everything. His great involvement with himself all the time, and it didn't bother about art. Art followed, and he talked about art, but his actual business was propagation of himself, actually, at certainly that art. So I said, do you agree with that? And he shook his head. Said yes.
Is it Suja Krishenji who suggested that your name is not Krishen, it is Christian?
No.
It's mentioned somewhere, probably playing with the sound of, you know.
Yeah, but that was sort of buffoon.
It's one of the latter.
But that happens. That happens in England, actually. For my sins, I was at school in England, and then they couldn't pronounce Christian, so they said Christian, and some people thought Chris, and you know, they wanted to make it easy for their own tongue, as it were. So, anyway.
Like KK2 Karl Khandalawala, so.
Karl Khandalawala, I said, no, I can't aspire that high.
Well, let me take the attention to the other side now.
Yeah.
Krishenji, Raza always, says about the importance and the presence of divine forces behind his paintings.
Yeah.
And I was talking to you once, and we had a bit of discussion on this. Do you believe in those divine forces behind your own creativity? Or, if not, then what are those provocative forces behind your creativity?
Well, I wish I could lay my hands on it, but what is true, and it is borne out by a number of things, not just one, that things, the big changes, the big things that have happened in my life, including my painting, are things that I never thought of before.
Yeah.
And I can't sort of program a thing and then work at it and say that this is the basis and then you project yourself therefrom. Nothing of the sort. Things happen. And you have to be, an artist I believe, has to be alive to what is happening and then pick out and then see and then appropriate and then work on it, That's the process. It happened. I mean, I'm not a photographer, but it's very strange. I mean, I was in Japan and I bought at the museum there a small slide of crows. There was a screen of crows flying around, and I bought this thing. And it was with me for a number of years. And then one day, after I finished painting a picture, and there was a very small studio in Mathura Road, and I thought I'd have a look at this slide. I had this projector, a tiny little thing which had a huge spread, larger than I thought it had, because I put in the slide and I put a little canvas on which I could project this thing. Now it projected well above. All these crows started flying all over my studio, and paper down from the floor to the ceiling to the top. And this little canvas had some little crow on it. And I thought, my God, I mean, what a marvelous visual this is. I wish I could paint it. Then I thought, now, because I'm a painter, I'm thinking, why don't I paint it? But actually, I can photograph it. And I went down, I got out my camera, and I took the timing and everything. It seemed to work perfectly. And I brought out this picture, which is phenomenal. After I'd done this, and several other pictures, the theory strikes me as to what has actually happened. And here's a photograph which has a built-in contradiction. That is, it is actually bringing in the third dimension photograph. Now, when this third dimension, which is in the slide, when it's projected onto actual three-dimensional objects, the slide reveals its character, and it's, the flatness of it creates a very different visual altogether. And so this thing, all these crows and things, they overlap, they get distorted in a kind of way that they fall upon, you see. And they take on that kind of distortion on which they... So I thought, well, this is marvelous. I mean, this is a wonderful theory that I'm exposing the fallacy which underlies the slide of photography. And this is a method of exposing it, not only exposing it theoretically, but then you're making something else out of it, which is positive, because I was then rephotographing the whole thing, you see. And anyway, I had some exhibitions out of this, and then it sort of went round, and then as usual, I mean, the whole thing had to become big. And then I participated in the Osaka Biennale, the trade fair in Osaka, and they made wall-size pictures. The Ministry of Minerals and whatever, they did that. They gave me a commission. Again, there was nothing much to get. But then I think the real conclusion to all this is that you don't chase money. Money chases you, if you're lucky. And even if it doesn't, I mean, there's enough trickle that can get you by. If you're really persistent with what you're doing, I think that the purity is in that, and not in trying to salvage, how much bank balance you can make. The moment you get into that, you start thinking of the kind of job that I was doing before I joined the painting. You know. So there's no point in that.
Krishenji, you have seen the Second World War, the
Yeah.
independence struggle, Gandhiji's assassination,
Yes.
the emergency time,
Yeah.
and so many wars after the independence. What is the impact of such, tragedies or
Events,
such incidences?
developments.
Yeah, on artists' thinking, because
Of course.
I'm keen on that.
Yeah. Well,
And you worked, I'm aware of those paintings also.
Yeah.
In spite of that, my question is,
Well, I mean, even those things and what happened in Peshawar the other day leaves you absolutely stunned. I mean, you can't start painting that situation or deriving an aesthetic impetus out of something which is that horrible. And it's the same thing when the partition took place. We couldn't think about start painting the partition because it hit us like a sledgehammer, It dislocated everything. And the future was bleak. You didn't know what was going to happen, nothing, you see. And so one grew out of that kind of situation of uncertainty in a sense. It's only much later that the images of that have distilled themselves in your mind, and they're there for you to pick on, to work on, because it has to be far removed, from that particular incident, in which the incident itself is so horrible that you can't start painting it. Painting it comes much later when you can reflect upon that incident, and I think that's what happened. I mean, the picture that you're referring to is Gandhiji's death. I actually saw this whole business, and the day he was shot, the people congregating in Connaught Place, and there were these little islands which were there. I think some are still there, but there'd be a lamp post, and under that, cluster of people with newspapers reading, and what you could see was sort of all whites, and in between people with their distraught faces and so on, and the image stuck, but it was in flash that I saw it, but it remained, and then later on, much later on, in Bombay when I was there, it was the first picture that I painted actually, and Palsekar, whom I knew, Palsekar saw it, and then he said, "We'll put it. Why don't you put it in the centenary exhibition of the Bombay Art Society?" I said, "I don't think it's that good, and so I've just done it, and I don't know." He said, "No, you must do it." He took it and he put it in, and I said, "That's actually my visiting card to all these painters."
Yeah.
When I didn't expect it to be there, and I went there, and I saw it right in the middle on the dais. And there was Souza there. There was Raza, got the award that year. He was in a different place, but he was there. There were all the painters there. Very funny story. He came to my room in Chateau Windsor, and we were talking and chatting and so on. And then he says, "Acha, phir milenge." And before that, there was a book lying on my table. It was Clive Bell's Art. I'd finished with that, I couldn't do it. He said, "Can I borrow this?" I said, "Please do." And fortunately, he lost it in the car, in the taxi that he taken. He lost it, he left it behind somewhere. And then the next day when I came back from work, I found a painting in the initially. They were very happy days, I can tell you.
You had close relations with poetry.
Very close.
I mean,
yes.
You were one of the. I
Yes.
do not forget that I never thought that anybody in India knew about Conrad Aiken.
Ah.
I used to think arrogantly that I was the only one who had liked him because he was in an anthology where I discovered him.
Wonderful thing.
Until I once heard you,
Yes.
and I was so surprised that
Yes.
you know about him. So tell us about because nowadays, I mean, I think creative community has become so ghetto
Yes.
oriented. There are ghettos of visual artists, there are ghettos of
Yes,
writers,
yes,
there are ghettos of poets, there are ghettos of dancers and musicians, etc. And there's no interaction. They're hardly aware of each other,
That's true.
etc. But that was not the case at that time.
No.
And I was in Bombay, and Vijaya Mehta, the theatre person,
Yeah.
saying that how she and Gaitonde and people like that will meet in Bholabhai,
Yes, yes.
and Al-Qazi,
Yeah.
and Hussain,
Yes,
and all
yes.
these people used to
That's
gather
all the
there
time,
and all that. Now,
yeah.
such a thing used to happen at one time at the Triveni thing, then it has just dissipated. It doesn't happen in Bombay either. But tell us about your
Well, these are,
fascination
I
with
think that
poetry.
these are just moments. I mean, I basically think that really painting, yes, I'm a painter, I've been doing it, but underlying all this is poetry. It's my prime love, actually. My library just consists of
Yes.
mainly poetry books. I mean, I studied the novel in college. It's fine, it's okay, it's very nice to be into. But it gets a little boring when we go on living. But the essence.
It's very boring for me fiction. But anyway.
Yeah. But the poetry is something which is, and I'm endowed, or fortunate, in that I have a memory for poetry.
Yeah.
And it just stays, and it comes.
No, hold on to it. Closer to your.
It's, yeah. I mean, so the underlay of my endeavors is poetry, and not only English poetry, I might add. I mean, there's a lot of Urdu poetry also which comes in, and Punjabi. A lot of Punjabi poetry comes into this also. I mean, I get I'm immensely moved actually by when you see from the Gurbani when something is read. Great poetry, you know. So. I find myself, for instance, at this ripe old age, waking up at 4 in the morning, not knowing what to do. I recite long poems to myself.
Now, this is not 4 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
but we are all here. So would you like to recite one for us? Not a long one, perhaps, but a short one.
Okay. When that April with a shower suit, the drought of March hath pierced to the root, and Zephyr Ziki with a sweety breath inspired hath in every holt and heath, and the youngest son hath in the ram his half-y coursey run. I get dislocated. But it sort of comes, you know. This will not, yeah. This is chosen. By that hangs another sort of link, in a sense, that I think Chaucer chose the Canterbury Tales
Yes.
In order to fill a large canvas. And it becomes a peg. It's a very worthy peg, you know. He involves people of all kinds and all stratas of society into one compact, wonderful work. And I think, you know, there's a lesson to be taken from that. That, I mean, much as people had, I think this is again a very European aesthetic, which said that, you know, any description is sentimental in art, which is nonsense, I think. And I think any form that is capable of such expansion is something to be valued, I think, and because I think in that sense, the Moria mural happened from that, because it is an expansion. It is I've taken all that into account. You know, different kinds of people coming, going, and all the rest of it. And finally, there is this Chinese traveler looking back on ruminating on what has happened all these years since he first came and to what now. Nothing much has changed really.
I think we had an
Yeah.
hour of conversation.
On my conversation.
So maybe we should now open it to the audience.
I have one question.
Oh, yeah, please. Audience.
Of course.
Before audience.
Yes.
Let me- Krishenji, I am keen on knowing how you feel when, when the place of your own birth, all of a sudden becomes another place in some other country. I'm talking between the division after the partition.
Huh.
Because when you met Tamayo,
Yeah.
and he said something interesting to you. I'm quoting your own statement
Yeah.
that do not to neglect your own territory.
Yeah.
Now, what does that territory mean to you? You live, you exist in territory, or you exist between the territories
Well,
as being big.
let's say,
It's not working.
is it on? Yeah, okay. I think this is all right.
Yeah.
I think the territory is a fundamental give, really. I was born there, I lived there, I made lots of friends there, and I can't suddenly just one day somebody draws a line and says, now you go there and you're different people, different countries. And so. It's a lot of nonsense to me, because a lot of my really deep friendships that I made and so on were all there, and how can I negate that? And even the city that I'm in, I have the habit of appropriating things, mentally, inside of me. But even trees and things I see, even mountains in Kashmir, which I said, they belong to me. They're part of my ethos. And so, whatever the political realities may be, I have the privilege of transgressing them, and I have to live according to my own development, my own thinking, my own being, actually. I can't suddenly say that, well, that is Pakistan, they're bad politics and so on. Yes, of course, there may be that. They may all be different and all that, but I still have some very good friends there. And I can't forget that every time I've been there 5 times, and each time I've been received with the greatest of affection by a lot of people, So and a lot of people whom I didn't know before either.
Yeah.
There is something very courteous about Islam, let's face it. And the language is beautiful. You choose to use it. But I would say the same for Hindi. It's a wonderful language, It's just that I wasn't brought up in it. So is Punjabi. They say Punjabi is a very cutter language. But it's also a very beautiful language. Things which can be said in Punjabi can't be said in any other language. Yeah, that's true. So one is actually that these earthquakes that happen, political earthquakes, they happen all the time. But the individual life is led by people, and you can't suddenly switch.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Just a minute. We'll get your mic. Please be brief.
मेरा नाम विजय कियावत है। पुराने जमाने के कलाकार जो कि 2 पीढ़ियों पहले हुआ करते थे और अभी के कलाकार के जो आपसी रिश्ते हैं, इसके बारे में आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे? जो आपने बदलाव देखा है या समझा है या आप महसूस करते हैं, उसके बारे में कुछ कहना चाहेंगे?
नहीं, इसमें यह है कि पुराने जो कलाकार थे, कौन से जमाने की कलाकार की बात कर रहे हैं आप? या तो
50 साल पहले और अभी।
50 साल
मतलब आप ही के जमाने की बात हो रही है।
मेरे जमाने की बात। अच्छा,
आपने जो महसूस किया उसके बाद।
वैसे मैं ये जरूर कहूँगा यहाँ कि मेरी दिलचस्पी जो है वो उनसे भी पुराने के साथ है। उनके काम अब ये खुदा जाने के ब्रिटिश कॉलोनियलिज्म ने हमें वो उनसे दूर कर दिया है या कट ऑफ कर दिया है, लेकिन मैं ज़रूर समझता हूँ कि उन्होंने जो कहना था वो काफ़ी अहम था, काफ़ी इम्पोर्टेंट चीज़ें थी जो कि हमें हमें स्वीकार नहीं की, जो कि करनी चाहिए, देखना चाहिए, re-examination. And even at 91, is it re-examining those very values and coming to conclusions on them, you know. I mean, after all, we've had very great painters amongst us, you know. And I think they need to, I'm not suggesting that we go back to miniature painting in the sense that they did. Miniature painting was necessary for them because they were illustrating manuscripts, stories and so on, and according to the order of the day. And a court painter couldn't paint outside of the court, in a sense. The painting had to be presented to court. And so the painting itself is a highly ordered thing.
Yeah.
Now, this doesn't happen, for instance, in Pahadi miniatures. They didn't have to sort of, they were only faithful to Krishna and his loves, you know, which was a wonderful thing. I mean, this is no end to it.
नहीं, मेरा प्रश्न शायद बराबर पूछ नहीं पाया. मैं पूछ रहा था कि 50 साल पहले जो आपसी रिश्ते हुआ करते थे कलाकारों के बीच में
जी,
और आज जो आप महसूस कर रहे हैं उसमें कुछ बदलाव है?
सब सच बात पूछें तो मेरे जो रिश्ते थे काफी तो वो ऊपर चले गए थे. वो मेरी बात वैसे गुफ्तगू होती है उनसे, बात तो वो तो कॉन्वर्सेशंस इतनी देर बाद जो होती रही है खतो किताबत में, लेकिन आजकल खतो किताबत शायद नहीं होती, लेकिन सोच तो होती है. ठीक है ना?
परमजीत सिंह की ज्यादा मत करना, बुला लेंगे.
नहीं, यानी जल्दी नहीं बुलाते होगी.
Yes? Anybody else? परमजीत सिंह, आप ही पूछ लीजिए. No? Anybody else?
Huh?
Yes?
Your role as an organizer also with Lalit Kala and with Bharat Bhavan.
Yes, I know what you're getting at.
Finale.
No, it's true. I mean, see, even in the group where we were, they understood one thing, that I'd left a job which had necessitated organization and financial discipline, all sorts of things, you see. And I'd quit that. I'd quit banking and I'd come there, and they thought that I could organize, and I was, willy-nilly. I mean, this job was thrown at me and I had to organize various things. For instance, the very first exhibition of drawings which happened in this city at Sridharani was organized by me. I did all that. You had to not fight, but take into account different temperaments which were, people were not happy at showing at that particular time, and you couldn't stay everybody else, and so they had to participate, and so various things happened. So this has happened all along. The worst thing that I ever had to encounter was the first Triennale India, which I was a commissioner jointly with the director of NGMA, and we went through. It was my job, his job, to select the Indian section, and we traveled throughout the country selecting paintings, and I was enunciating. I'd drawn up a pro forma on which I would send to the secretary, was Mr. Sanyal, and give him what we'd actually selected. Of course, the horrible thing was that here I was a painter and dealing with painters who were senior to me, who were also great friends of mine. But in all fairness to the project, it was very essential that I look at their works just as I was looking at everybody else's works. I couldn't make that differentiation. I couldn't possibly say that, oh, I know he's a good painter, therefore he's in. Because everybody else, I mean, there'd be a row, a racket at that. So it led to, I won't go into the details, but it led to some very unsavory situations. However, do let me tell you that great good friendship overcomes that kind of bitterness also. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to know that it never broke. Our friendships never broke. I was criticized, and yes, I accepted their criticism. But much later, sort of wisdom dawns. At that particular stage, I was doing the right thing. In fact, the exhibition of Indian painters which I created was acknowledged by the international jury in writing that it's a pity that the Indian section is not competing because it's one of the best. Akbar Padamsee and I rehung that show 5 times over. I mean, that was the kind of diligence that was required to put up an exhibition. And the other thing was that I was taking, every time I selected a painting, I took the measurements. I knew my total wall space. I knew the proportion that how much the wall space would be needed all along. And I went on minusing so that there was no kind of throwover, So, and that's exactly what happened. We took in paintings and things, all of them accommodated extremely well, and it was a very, very well hung show, But then I was criticized by my friends for this, with legitimacy, I might add. But I did the thing the best I could. Now, so many years have passed since then, and there's a reflection on those times and the things that happened. And I do feel that I think if you're a painter, then one should not accept all those things, Let other people do it. The argument against this, I mentioned this even at the time. They said, well, we don't have so many people who can organize like you can. Now maybe I was flattered, I don't know, but I certainly don't think that it's any part of my business to be organized. I'm not an organizer, I'm a painter. And that's how it should be, There are many incrustations which come about, which impinge on you without your knowing it even, because you are good at something and you're putting that out, but you've actually disposed of that in a sense. So there's no point in taking that back again, That's what I feel now.
So what about your experience in Bharat Bhavan? You were...
Well, Bharat Bhavan was, shall we say, that I was amongst fellow roysters. They were all good company, they were wonderful, understanding people. And I don't think I rubbed anybody up the wrong way. I mean, we were asked to do a job, we did it. And did it, I remember asking you, to put up a whole huge exhibition, 5 times the size of this. And so Ashok says, this must go up by tomorrow morning. I said, Jesus Christ, how can you put it up tomorrow morning? What's so holy about tomorrow morning? I mean, why can't we extend it another 3 days and so? Mrs. Gandhi is coming. That put the fear of God into us, and so we did. Stayed up overnight and did it. And finally, we divided work. I was doing the tribal section, and that was extremely well hung. I must say, the people working there were very enthused and wanting to do things, And the other section was done by Bal Chavda and Akbar.
I mean, in my life, that was the first experience where such eminent artists, the most major artists of the country, were putting up a show.
Yes, it was.
This was an exhilarating experience because it was Ghulam Sheikh who was doing the K.G. Subramaniam show because he was getting the Kalidas Samman.
Yes.
It was KRISHEN, of course, Swami, KRISHEN, Akbar Padamsee, Bal Chavda, Hussain joined in, Ram Kumar, etc.
Yes.
And some of them, because we were in this, and there were problems, the walls were
Wet.
wet.
Yeah.
and they had to be huge blowers which were trying to dry them up, and they would have differences, and my job used to be around 8 o'clock to take a couple of bottles of rum and some kebabs and some samosas,
Yes, yes.
and to sort of cool down the tempers and all that. And sometimes, and this is absolutely amazing to recall, this happened only 32 years ago.
That's right.
That these artists, because it was late night, early morning they were working, they were sleep on newspapers,
Yes, yes.
on the floor
Yes,
of
yes,
the
yes,
gallery.
yes, yes.
I mean, it was
Yeah,
an
yeah.
incredible
Yeah.
experience. I get tears in my eyes remembering that this was happening. And this was all happening because they all of a sudden, all of them were owning this institution, which was a great
That
thing.
is it. That is
You
it.
know, this was a great
But this
thing.
was when we talk about the old group,
Yeah.
it was just that.
Yeah.
There was a cohesion, amongst people. Even though the art and what we did was our business in a sense, but we all spoke about each other's work as well. you know.
Yeah.
I remember Gaitonde in New York. He helped me mount my exhibition. He was showing. Then soon after that, that show was an abstract show, Sumi paintings. After that, I started painting figures. And Gaitonde comes to me, he says, "Why are you doing this?" He says, "You hit on such a wonderful tack, and you were doing such good work in that, and suddenly you throw it about, you wrap it all up, and you want to paint figures and so on." So, and I gave him an answer which was truthful about me.
Yeah.
Which was, people thought that now that and the situation in New York was such that I've become successful doing something. It was a very successful show. And therefore, I'm obliged to continue with this kind of success, And I thought, well, hell, I mean, this is not a dhobi mark, that I'm putting on, to just do. So I said, well, let's cool off this thing for a while, and we'll see what happens, So that's it. So later on, Gaitonde changed his mind about some paintings.
You wanted to ask? Yes.
Murals.
Yeah.
Did you know, I think you didn't, you told me once, know that Hussein windows were going to come in below?
Yeah.
I-
Hussein's.
Hussein, yes.
Yeah.
Did you know they were coming, or was it?
They were coming. In fact,
In fact, you haven't put it on, I think.
just kick it a bit.
Like all good things in India, they have to be kicked into action. Yes. ये ले जाओ ये.
It is now.
Yeah.
When you were doing the murals in
Yeah.
Memorial Sheraton,
Yeah.
did the Hussein paintings on the windows
Yeah.
come later, or can I cheekily ask you whether they came because it took 5 years to do the murals?
No. They happened alongside, actually. They happened while the mural was still being painted and done, and then of course, he was such a fast worker. It's not true, because he did these things almost overnight, and put them up. And well, I thought I didn't think that it was such a great move to put those things over there. And I spoke to Ajit. I said, Hussein's an important major painter, so don't relegate him to a little window dressing there. Give him a proper place and thing. And he said, soachenge ye wo, but Hussein couldn't have cared a damn. He really didn't. I mean, in fact, he said, why are you taking such a long time over here? He said, mujhe de main khatam kar deta hu. And on one occasion, I'll tell you, he's just standing, like, Hussein's here, I'm here, and so on. Suddenly, a whole sort of a regiment of Japanese tourists walks in, you see, and they're looking at this thing like that, and so on, and then inevitably they bring out their little cameras, you see, they want to start photographing, and then they ask the man, who's the artist, and he pointed towards us, see, So they pointed their cameras towards us. At which point I took 2 steps back. I said, it was that Hussain took 1 step forward. Well, that was it, you know. And that's the way he wanted it, and that's the way I wanted it. And that's but I don't think that those things do him any justice, frankly. You know, his pictures, the triptych, which is on the 3rd or 4th row there, which is what I bought for the hotel. It's a very good picture. You know.
Well, friends, we had a wonderful evening with KRISHEN KHANNA, talking about his life, his vision, his difficulties. Or he didn't talk too many difficulties, and all that. So thank you very much for coming, and good night.